Hey everyone, Chris Breen here. So in this lesson, I want to use the minor pentatonic scale shape in the first position, so that, classic box shape that we all probably know and love. We're not going to talk about that actual scale in this lesson. I want to use it, that concept, as sort of a template or a jumping off point, so that we can start to visualize arpeggios, in this case, seventh arpeggios, in a way that's hopefully more attractive to the novice player or even the intermediate player who, when they hear the term arpeggio, they might be turned off by it. And my motivation for this video is because I noticed this over the years, that there seems to be two camps of players. Maybe people who haven't gotten formal lessons or formal education in music theory. You mention arpeggio to them, and they start to link it with sweep picking. Players like Yngwie Malmsteen in the 80s popularized the sweep picking technique, which is great. This is not a knock on Yngwie Malmsteen, obviously, but you start to have these players who either love sweep picking and love that shred sound, or it just turns them off completely. You have maybe like the Hendrix and Clapton camp, who just want to play slow, kind of groove-oriented blues rock. And when you say arpeggio, it sounds very classical, and it sounds esoteric and, an elite, technique. So what I want to do with this lesson is I want to bridge the gap between these two camps, see if we could find a middle ground, and to let you know that you do not have to learn sweep picking to effectively utilize arpeggios. And also, I'm going to try to sprinkle in some new sounds. We're going to use maybe arpeggios that you've never heard of before, as far as your ear not being used to them, and give you a taste of unconventional melodic and harmonic content. So let's jump right into this lesson by first demystifying what arpeggio actually means. It's not as complicated as it sounds. Basically, all you're doing is you're taking a chord, and in this case we'll use something familiar. Let's say a G major chord, for example. And we're playing the individual notes that comprise that chord, one note at a time. When you play it like that, you're doing what is called arpeggiating the chord. And I think the translation actually for arpeggio is something close to the effect of broken chord. So you're just taking the pieces of something, taking it away from the whole, and breaking it down and playing just the separate parts. Now, the basic foundation for all of the open chords, for example, all of the major and minor chords, are triads, only 3 notes. So if our objective in this lesson is to start configuring arpeggios to emulate pentatonic style shapes, 3 notes really isn't enough. We need to get to 5 notes, because as some of you might know, pentatonic actually means 5 note. So the minor and the major pentatonic are both comprised of a 5-note pattern, and with the separation between the notes, they easily fit into 2-note per string patterns. So if that is our goal for this lesson, we have to get to that magic number of 5. So how do we do that? The first logical step is to move towards 7th chords. Now, if you're not familiar with theory or what 7th chords actually are, all it really means is you're adding 1 extra note on top of the triad foundation. So with your triad, you have 3 notes. You take the 7th interval of a particular scale, and now you have a 4-note chord. If it's a major 7th chord, that means you're taking a major triad and adding a major 7th interval. If you want a minor 7th chord, you take the minor triad and you add a minor 7th interval. This is all 7th chords are. So in this particular situation, we're going to build on what are called dominant 7th arpeggios. And like I said, without getting too crazy into the theory side of it, dominant 7th chords have a very bluesy sounding melodic and harmonic sound. I wanted to kind of ease your ears into it, so those of you who have that type of background, this will sound familiar to you. So here is a dominant 7th chord. First I'll play the chord, and then I'll break it down and show you what the dominant 7th arpeggio will look and sound like. So So as I said, so now we're at 4 notes. Let's try to get to that 5th note. The next predictable way you can do this is to just keep one of the notes from the minor pentatonic, which would be the perfect 4th interval. And it's this note in the minor pentatonic shape. So that note doesn't really rock the boat. It's not going to change the overall sound of what the dominant 7th arpeggio kind of conveys as far as mood and quality. So let's keep that interval around, and what you end up having is basically a minor pentatonic scale shape with just the pinky note, that 2nd note, which would be the minor 3rd interval, moved up a half step, and now you have a major 3rd interval. And this is how it will look like. So let's hear how this will sound in a jam situation. Now the next thing we're going to do might rock the boat a little bit as far as your ears. We're going to take everything we just did. Dominant 7th is our foundation. We're going to take that perfect 4th interval, which we were using kind of as a passing tone, which fits very, very nicely into our minor pentatonic framework here. We're going to move it up a half a step. So you would think a half a step of a difference really wouldn't change the overall quality. It does do something interesting to the sound, though. It starts to sound Lydian. If you're not familiar with the Lydian sound, it's derived from the Lydian mode, from the major scale, and it's all based upon the premise that you're starting with a major triad. That note, if you were building it off of a minor triad, would actually sound darker and would be a diminished 5th interval. And here's how it would sound in a minor context. But like I said, since we're working with a dominant 7th, the foundation is a major triad. So it actually does not sound diminished at all. It sounds Lydian while still keeping that dominant 7th sound. So in theory talk, we're developing a Lydian dominant sound. So here's how this Lydian dominant, I guess pentatonic pattern you can call it, will look like. Here's how it's going to sound in a jamming situation. So now we just worked with 2 ways we can manipulate the dominant 7th arpeggio to either sound consistently traditional and bluesy, or just changing even a half note or half step difference, and now it becomes this Lydian dominant sound, which might be a little foreign to your ears. We're now going to go in a different direction and experiment with what is called a minor major 7th chord. If you're not familiar with a minor major 7th chord, don't let the name throw you off and intimidate you. Basically all you're doing is you're working with the foundation of a minor triad with a major 7th interval added on top of that minor triad. And it has this dissonant sound. Something you might hear in a Twilight Zone episode or something like that. It's obviously not for everyone, but you could definitely have fun and experiment with it. And here's the arpeggio of that chord. This chord has the added advantage of being used in 2 different situations musically. it can call two different scales home, either the harmonic minor scale, which is more of a classical metal sounding scale, definitely more in the vein of Yngwie Malmsteen, or it also is linked with the melodic minor scale, which has a jazzier approach, a jazzier sound. So let's add that same note we just added to the dominant 7th arpeggio, which would have been the sharp 4th interval, which gave that dominant 7th arpeggio a Lydian sound. Let's add that same note to this minor major 7th arpeggio and see how it sounds. Here's how it would sound in a jamming situation. So that example could kind of work with a harmonic minor scale, even though that harmonic minor scale doesn't have a diminished 5th interval within it. Since we're using it only as a passing tone, it's not going to add too much tension between the two examples. You could play it and you can interchange it with a harmonic minor run or a scale lick, something like that, and it would just add a little bit of color to the jam session. If you want it to sound a little bit more melodic minor-like, you could do this and add a major 6th interval. The major 6th interval is within the melodic minor scale. Here's how this would look. And just to kind of get your ears used to it, I'm going to do a jam example of how it would work while I interchange it with a melodic minor scale. So those are the three patterns we used in this lesson. And like I said, I kind of just wanted to break the ice for those of you who, as soon as they hear the word arpeggio, you just get intimidated. You don't know too much about it. It's really not that complicated. It's basically just chord tones. Notes within chords that you play all of the time, just broken up and treated as if they were scales. And then also I want to step further and try as much as possible to match them with the existing pentatonic box shape that you guys are familiar with. If we could configure them to 2-note per string patterns without moving too much across a certain fret radius, and it's all just seamlessly in one position from the low E string to the high E string, it's much more manageable and it's easier to memorize these patterns. And then once you're comfortable with them, you can take charge and own these patterns and really internalize the musical sound that they exhibit and infuse them into your style and add some color and difference from just the typical rock licks that you hear all the time and that you probably get in a little bit of a rut using. So I hope this kind of opened the door for some of you out there who want to hear something different and want to be exposed to different types of sounds.